Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Coaching the Bible. This is episode 230, season 5, episode 17. Our topic of the week is the leadership covenant, trust, action, and the decision that define the people. It was a brutal week here in Israel. Yesterday was impossible to describe in words. Rage, anger, sadness, frustration, shock, surprise. It never ceases to defy the words that are necessary to explain what's going on here and who it is that we're dealing with in this conflict, in this moment. The worst horror novelists couldn't write what's going on right now. Just pray that it ends soon and that we never have to deal with this entity and this group of people again. And we can stand alone and stand in our with our feet facing forward and our heads held high towards a much greater, much bigger, much more beautiful destiny for us here. And hopefully that day comes soon. For today, in our ongoing and never-ending conversation around decision-making, we have to talk about Sinai. The Bible tells us that as they stood at the edge of the mountain, they stood at the feet of the mountain, the Bible tells us that the following happens. They're standing there. The moment has come. They have marched through the sea. They have survived the plagues. They have moved from slavery to freedom and from some form of chaos to some sort of clarity. For months they followed Moses through all of it. And now they stand at the foot of Mount Sinai. The mountain is engulfed in thunder, in lightning, and obviously the divine presence, God, is present as well. Moses has spoken. The laws are before you. He has read them to the people. There's no conference room for negotiation. There's no back and forth, redlining a document. There are no alternatives being considered here. There's no town hall to debate. There's nothing. Moses puts it before the people. And incredibly, although I would say unsurprisingly, they do not deliberate, they do not hesitate, they do not wait, they do not flinch. And as a collective singular voice, they all say, we will do and we will hear. Famously in Hebrew, na'aseh v'nishma. They have committed to the future. They have committed to their destiny. They have committed to their future identity before knowing all the details. It's an incredible moment. It is the high of high moments. It is the top of top moments. It is the purpose for which all of it has taken place, is receiving the law on the mountain, being in the presence of the divine, and making that statement. But when you think about that statement, you have to ask yourself a set of questions. How does an entire nation commit to a decision without knowing all the details? Why do they not need to even discuss it for a moment? Wasn't it even a choice, or is it inevitable? There is that notion of that there's no choice here at all. What's going on psychologically, emotionally, spiritually, philosophically that makes this even possible? And then obviously, like we always talk about here, is there something to be learned for the modern day leader? It's not the notion that everybody should simply just say, whatever you say, I'm going to do. That's not exactly the idea here. Although maybe some leaders would prefer that. But the truth is, this is not really here just about faith. This is really about collective leadership, collective decision making, and then ultimately creating a movement that has endured for a very long time. And so we have to appreciate this collective decision. In other words, things we've talked about before, for the most part, have been individual decisions. So you had all the people in Genesis, this individual decision making that's going on. At the beginning here, you have Moses making decisions, you have Pharaoh making decisions. We had individual groups of people making decisions one by one in each different circumstance. And then we've progressed into the notion of a collective, the people moving and crossing the sea as decisive communal decision-making moment. But last week we talked about the idea of Moses moving all the parts and pieces into new structure and creating new rigor for the community, for the future, long-term future. And here we're at this moment of we will do and then we will listen. We have to understand that as a leadership moment, as a decision-making moment, and try on some level to grasp the heft and the import of such a moment. So let's start here. The first thing we have to appreciate is this did not happen in isolation. It's not like they just showed up at the mountain having done nothing before and then made this decision. This is progression. This has taken an extended period of time to get to this place. It's a culmination of this leadership arc, if you want to use that term, that begins all the way in Egypt. What we talked about is the idea of the first moments of belief in the possibilities of change, the people crying out for help, the idea of persistent, pressured action and leadership, Moses and Aaron pressing Pharaoh with the plagues and with the constant requests for freedom. We talked about the decisive leadership of leaving. We talked about leap leadership. Remember, a couple of weeks ago, the idea of jumping into the waters, of going through, of really creating separation and distinction. And now, this new space. And what's this new space? This is all the covenantal leadership space. This is now trusting in the mission before knowing all the details. The people are committing as one without debate. And so what we have to appreciate is the first takeaway from this idea of covenantal leadership is that this kind of leadership, or great leadership, let's call it, right? Buy-in is not a moment. It's actually a process built through progressively greater trust exercises, for lack of a better term. I love the way that's just framed. If we're in a classroom, we can put that on the board. We could unpack every single word of that. But appreciate that this, yes, happens in a moment, but it didn't just take a moment for it to happen. This is progress over time that shows itself in an instant. That's super important to appreciate here. Number two is this idea here of what you might call a collective commitment without a debate, right? No discussion, no hesitation, no deliberation, no negotiation. How does that work? How do people do that, right? We don't have like people winking at each other. So if you're in a space now today where you're looking across the room at somebody, a colleague, a teammate, whatever, they can read your mind, they can read your eyes, you can get a message across non-verbally, a flinch, a micro move of a hand, whatever it may be, right? We've talked in the past about the idea of teammates thinking with each other, knowing what each other are going to do and being able to operate that way. Here's the whole nation. So we break it down with the idea of thinking fast and slow, of system one versus system two thinking of Daniel Kahneman. And in that book, in the idea of breaking down an idea of decision-making theory, system one thinking is very fast and it's intuitive, it's trust-based and it's automatic. And system two thinking is very slow and it's very deliberative and it's rational and it's analytical. We have to think about what happened here. What happened here is neither one nor two. It's actually a blend. The moment at Sinai is system one thinking. It's fast, intuitive, trust-based, and automatic. There's no hesitation whatsoever. And so one could assume that one can make a decision like this and just rush into a decision like this, or think that they rushed into this decision. It's not true, because the slow, deliberative, rational, analytical process has been going on over the course of time. From the moment that this process started all that time ago until this moment is system 2 thinking. They don't have all the time in the world in the moment, but they've taken the time till that moment. And so you get this very interesting blend of thinking, decision-making, that's learned out much later in time now in thinking fast and slow. And so they're not overwhelmed. On some level, they're not overwhelmed by the moment, but they can make this decision because on some level, the decision has already been made. And the reason that's true is because here, when the trust is absolute, the decision-making can shift from the deep rational analysis to something instinctive and immediate. And so you can think about that in the space of when you have worked with somebody for a long period of time, you've built that trust up. When they ask you to do something, even if it's wild and bold, you'll say yes because of all the buildup till that moment, of all the capital that has been earned and banked over the course of maybe months, years, whatever that is. And so it's very important to appreciate that. And relatedly then, the role of the prior experience is a factor here. So this is not, in that sense, spontaneous or some sort of a blind leap. This is almost an inevitable outcome of a prior experience. So whereas we talk about system 1, system 2 thinking, and the deliberative versus the non-deliberative, the faster, no hesitation thinking, can also appreciate that there is stuff that's driving it. We talked about before about the progression, but there's another aspect of that, not just the progression of one to the next to the next. There is the experience from one to the next to the next, which helps in decision commitment, right? And so number one is that you have priming from stage 1 to stage 2 to stage 3 of this process. The priming is this idea that prior experience shapes how people react to new information without them realizing what's going on. So you want to prime a person. I talked about this a lot, and I still do in fundraising. You want to prime an audience leading up to when you want to ask them for that donation. You're setting it up. Or if you were in a business and you're marketing a product, you're setting up a progression of moments that lead to the person making a purchase. That is priming your audience. That is priming your target customers. And here, you get that same idea as well. What primed the people, they don't need to now consciously think about this because it's almost been mentally preconditioned into them. And the idea then is that some will view this as they had no free will to make this decision. It's not that they had no free will. It's that at this point, this decision was inevitable. And so the combination of the Exodus, the miracles, the leadership of Moses has primed them that because they've been consistently exposed to a certain set of beliefs, to certain expectations, certain authority figures, so they are in a position to make a decision in a certain direction, and they're okay, and they're good with that decision. So the decision here is not new, it's simply the logical endpoint of that process. So it's really important to appreciate that they did not have to weigh pros and cons of commitment. They'd already made the decision leading up into this moment. And so that's a really key kind of psychological approach that's going on. And there are many, many more, but I don't want to spend all day on it. You have to think about how these things play out. What's going on here is not some impulsive, irrational, blind leap. This is the natural next step in the relationship, in the covenant building, in the growth of the people who've already internalized so much from what they've gone on before. We could talk about all kinds of ideas. We could talk about high trust group behavior, which is really important, which very much fits in here. There's the negative side, some sort of, the idea where this hive mind in the negative, but here it's high trust, and there's a lot of that progression that really plays into this role. And so really thinking about how that might actually work in understanding what's going on. So when we're thinking about this in the modern space, is you're priming towards a certain behavior. You're setting yourself up. Prior experience and prior commitments and prior actions have put you into a space where making a decision that looks irrational, that looks unconventional, that looks really outside the box is built on the progression over the course of time. And so while it's not an exact perfect scenario in the modern world, think about the American Revolution as sort of the same idea. Progression over time, a certain set of activities, certain responses from the colonial power, right, from the British. The idea of the revolution starting, the Declaration of Independence, before even knowing if they could win, leaping into that space, stepping into that space, but it's all based on having the high trust, having not all of them necessarily, all the colonies are in agreement there, but as they're building, as they're doing that, the Declaration of Independence takes place before the war is won, before the country is actually free. And so you get that there's this idea that they worked all the way to that point, and they've created a space where the covenantal moment is upon them, and it's really not even a question any longer at that point. And so that is very much how this works. The greatest missions in history, I think, you can take it from moon landings to revolutions, were committed to before they were fully understood. That's really what's going on here. And Sinai was the ultimate model of this kind of leadership buy-in. The people bought into God, they bought into the Bible, they bought into the law, they were bought into Moses. They committed fully before they knew exactly what was going on, what it was, because of all the other things that had gone on before. And so you as a leader can implement almost an idea of like a Sinai level structure into your work. You can craft that vision in advance. You can build the emotional experience that creates buy-in between the different team members. You can establish no hesitation commitment culture, right? You can get people to say yes to things over today because of what happened over the course of time. And then you can continue to reinforce it and to build it over time. And so when you do this, and you build what you would call high trust and high group trust, and even in high stakes moments as a result of, you can get instant buy-in, and people are not feeling forced because they feel like it's a natural response. And so Sinai, as it existed then, is not, in that sense, a one-time moment, because it is replicable in the modern space. And we can build into spaces and opportunities like a Sinai moment for the moments of today. And so we'll end with a quote like we always do. It's a quote from Peter Drucker, which I think we've used probably more than once. The best way to predict the future is to create it. People in Israel did not wait for certainty, they acted. They did not ask for guarantees, they committed. They did not say, let's wait until we fully understand everything. They built the future by embracing the mission first. And that's a very high level of leadership, trust, and commitment, perhaps the highest level of leadership, trust, and commitment that ever was. And we're looking to try and replicate and duplicate that in our own spaces, in our own communities, in our own homes. This is Sinai. It's not easy to do. It's understandable, but it's not easy to do. It's not easy to implement. But if we're able to put ourselves in a position where we no longer need to debate because it's no question what we're going to do, where we no longer have to be concerned about how people are going to behave or how they're going to decide, and they don't feel like they're forced into it, then that is a natural outcome of incredibly deep trust and ultimately gets you incredibly good and very powerful results. That is Coaching the Bible for this week. May the coming week bring us only good news, only happiness and health and blessing and success. I wish it for myself. I wish it for my family. I wish it for all of us. I look forward to seeing you next week.